Good morning, everybody. I'm blinded. So thank you. I just want to especially thank Catherine for inviting me here today. It's my first time at Johnson since a long time. I was at this event in Florida last year, and I unfortunately came on the very last day. But I was just really intrigued by all of the presentations, and I'm thrilled to be able to be here for the full time this time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see. As noted, I'm actually now, that was an old bio, I'm now the executive director, important, of the Center for Air and Space Law. The University of Mississippi is one of the only schools in the world that has a space law program. We're one of 4, and ours is actually the oldest. We've been teaching space law since 1965, so 2 years before the Outer Space Treaty. I'm also the co-founder of For All Moonkind. We're the only organization in the world, as noted, that is talking about protecting and preserving, safeguarding heritage that is in outer space, not space heritage here on Earth. And I'm going to talk today about the complexities involved with that. I do want to remind everybody, and I do this, we're a permanent observer at the United Nations, and I address the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space 3 times a year. And each year, there's about 104 countries that are involved in that committee. And every time I address them, I remind them that they are in the room because we're talking about human destiny. Because it is without question that the decisions we make today with respect to preserving history, with respect to exploration and the use of space and its resources are going to have far-reaching implications for humanity for generations to come. And preservation is such an important part of who humans are, who we want to be, and how we get there, that I try to impress upon everybody that I speak to how important it is to think about safeguarding and understand why we want to protect. So I'm going to talk about why we care. That's sort of going to be a little walk through history there. And I'm going to share a little bit about the law, not too much. As mentioned tonight, there's going to be another presentation, if you will. It's going to be more of a discussion with my colleague Art Dula. We'll get into more of the sort of ins and outs of space law itself. And I'll be talking about space law and new space activities. And I'm going to talk about what For All Moonkind's been doing since we were formed in 2018. So why do we care? This is the part that you all probably know already. You know, our humanity's exploration of the moon did not start with Apollo. It started with Luna 2, which had a hard impact on the lunar surface in September of 1957. September 12th, it's the day my parents got married, incidentally. So I remember their anniversary that way. So Luna 2 was really interesting because it went up and it went with this sphere. And that sphere, you can see, was a bunch of medallions, and they were supposed to break apart and spread out on the lunar surface. Now, why would they want to do that? And this is what is really important when we think about preservation. So if you recall, the Russians, the Soviet Union was beating the United States left and right? They got the first satellite into orbit with Sputnik. And when that happened, President Eisenhower did a really interesting thing. So when you think about the law and you think about airspace, right? We know that you cannot fly into somebody else's airspace, into another sovereign state's airspace. You do that, then that state is permitted to shoot you down. And that's what happened a lot of times during the Cold War, right? So when something goes into space over your country, should it be the same thing, right? You should be able to shoot it down. They're going to be able to spy on you. Well, President Eisenhower said no. No, we want space to be free. We want freedom of exploration and use. We want to be able to go over the Soviet Union the same way they're going over us. So President Eisenhower did not object. And so it became what we call customary international law, instant custom, that space shall be free for exploration and use by all. And the Soviet Union was really taken aback by this decision and sort of thought, wait a minute. No, we want to have sovereignty of all of our airspace and all of our space. And so when they sent Luna 2 and they sent it with a sphere that would explode or scatter, they were actually trying to make a property claim. Now, we didn't have the Outer Space Treaty yet, but this is one way you can say, hey, that's my stuff there. This is me. We were there first. We own it. Of course, the Soviet Union also had the first soft landing on the lunar surface with Luna 9. It had the first wheels on the lunar surface with the Lunokhod vehicle. But of course, the United States won the space race by being the first to send humans to the moon, the only country to send humans to the moon. And this, of course, is the iconic picture from Apollo 11. We didn't just send humans, and this is really important. When we think about what did Neil and Buzz take with them to the lunar surface, well, they took a gold olive branch, right, a signal of peace. They took a patch from Apollo 1, a memorial to the astronauts who had perished in this space race. They also took medallions from the cosmonauts who had perished in the space race. So they knew, and this was something that Neil and Buzz were told, made the decision on their own. And I'm just thinking now, because Robert Perlman, who is on our leadership council at For All Moonkind, probably knows all of these stories much better than I do. And I might be wrong, and you can please correct me if I am. But my understanding is that Neil and Buzz made the decision to take the cosmonaut medals. That was their personal decision because they wanted to honor, even though we were at a Cold War with them. We also took messages of peace. These were messages from 74 different nations with messages, and 201, all of those messages are about kinship, about peace, about the human achievement. It was very much a human achievement, not an American achievement. So of course, Apollo 11 was followed by several other Apollo missions. I just want to go through and talk briefly about some of the things they left. Again, now Apollo 12 is our very first archaeological mission in space. It landed near Surveyor 3, and they actually brought a piece of Surveyor back to Earth to be studied. And that was very important because we learned a lot about being worried about the plume effect from that piece of Surveyor 3 that was brought back. There is a rumor that the first artwork on the moon is attached to the leg of the Apollo 12 LEM. This is a tile that had sketches from the biggest artists of the day. And there's actually an entire PBS special about whether that tile is on there or not. Of course, everything that was supposed to be recorded, and so if it is on the LEM, then it was put there in violation of the rules of NASA. Apollo 14, we have the first golf balls shanked on the moon. And people always ask me, well, do we need to protect the golf balls too? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, it would be kind of nice. Do we need to protect them on site? Maybe not, but this is the first time. And I think, again, when we think about preservation, when we think about safeguarding, what are we talking about? We're not just talking about protecting history and getting things in the books. We're talking about capturing the spirit of humanity. And so when we talk about the things that are in Apollo, we know that we want to protect the LEMs and the instruments. We also want to protect the things that show we are human, and that includes the golf balls. It includes, the question of whether Neil Armstrong left his daughter's bracelet on the moon or not. Apollo 15, we have showed the force of gravity, the gravity experiment, dropping a hammer and a feather at the same time. That hammer and that feather are still on the moon. You can watch this on YouTube, and I know as a non-scientist, it was really important for me to see that it's true that a feather and a hammer will drop at the same rate. We also left in this mission what's called the Fallen Astronaut Memorial, and you'll see there the names of all of the cosmonauts and astronauts who had perished in the quest for the moon, in the quest for space. Of course, Apollo 16 has one of the most famous personal memorabilia left on the moon. Charlie Duke left a picture of his family on the moon. And this is raising questions now when we think about it, because there are a lot of missions now where you can send your picture to the moon. And for a small fee with any number of companies at this point. And so the question is, well, from my point of view, are we junking up the moon? If everybody were to send a picture to the moon, there would be 6 billion pictures on the moon, right? So is that something we want to see happening with our moon? But by the same token, what makes Charlie Duke so special? If Charlie Duke can leave his picture on the moon, why can't I? And of course, Apollo 17 is our final mission human mission to the moon, and hopefully we will be seeing humans back on the moon within the next couple of years. But it's a true testament to what Apollo did, what Apollo accomplished, that we have not been back in more than 50 years. This is incredible when we think about that human achievement of what they did, how they got there, how important it was, and the humanity that they took with them. And that is what we talk about protecting. And again, not just Apollo. Of course, you know, when we always have the words of Eugene Cernan as he stepped off the surface of the moon. As we leave the moon at Torres Littrow, he said, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return with peace and hope for all humankind." And that is what one of the things we're trying to capture at For All Moonkind, is that peace and hope that Apollo took with them to the moon. Let's find that again, and let's preserve and protect that. That's what safeguarding is about. Of course, though, it's not just Apollo, right? Chang'e has made it to the moon. We have a lot of robotic missions, Ranger, Surveyor. In addition, we have commercial impacts on the moon. Bereshit was an Israeli company that hard landed. Hakuto R, a Japanese company that hard landed. Of course, I don't have a picture of it, but Intuitive Machines, a US company, soft landed, if you remember it, with a tilt. Again, showing just how hard it is what was accomplished by Apollo. And it's so important to know, we know that all of those things remain preserved on the moon. Humans haven't been back. There's no erosion on the moon. There's no rain. We see the equipment from Lunar Orbiter, from the LRO. We see pictures. Chandrayaan-3 took amazing pictures of Apollo 11. And so we know that these artifacts are all there on the moon, and yet they're unprotected. There's nothing protecting them. They're not national parks, right? They're not World Heritage Sites. How can they be? They're not on the world. And there's no law that protects them. There's nothing stopping anybody from going up there, sending a rover up there, sending, you know, SpaceX was talking about sending remote control cars up there and running over these footpaths and these rover tracks and this equipment. The sites memorialize, these sites that are preserved and protected on the lunar surface, memorialize the work of thousands. People always say, you know, Apollo, 400,000 Americans were involved in that effort. But it's so much more than that, right? So many people were vested in the Apollo. They memorialize, and the Apollo sites themselves memorialize not just the work of Apollo, but the work of everybody who has ever dreamed of space. 650 million people joined together to watch this event. This was an amazing moment in human history. This is something that we need to preserve because humanity came together in a way that we had never seen before. Of course, not everybody was happy. And we look at when Apollo 11 was on the launch pad. This caravan came actually from Mississippi, where I live now, and they took a donkey caravan, a cart hauled by a donkey, all the way from Mississippi to Florida to protest. You know, if you can send a human to the moon, why can't you feed people on Earth, right? And the NASA administrator came out and met with them and said, look, if I thought that giving you this money, instead of sending it to space, would be able to solve all of our problems, I would do it in a heartbeat. And this is something, again, history is so important, right? Because we see the same kind of complaints about Jeff Bezos and about Elon Musk. Well, why don't you spend your money on fixing the problem of hunger in the world? Well, yeah, tell them how. This is something that they can accomplish. And ultimately, the NASA administrator, marketing, of course, but he invited several of the leaders of this caravan to come and watch the launch. And in anticipation of the launch, they all sort of felt that awe. And even then they said, okay, you know, Godspeed, Neil and Buzz. And we get it. You know, this is something we need to move forward. We can do both things at once. So going to space, getting to space, was an incredible achievement. When we talk about, as you all well know, when we talk about the milestones of humanity, of humanity's growth, we think about things like our ability to make fire, to use fire rather than run in fear from it. We talk about our ability to overcome that primal fear of open water, to build boats and travel across it. We talk about the ability to to tell stories, to communicate with each other. These are all human milestones, human achievements. They are all equal to what Neil and Buzz did. Getting to space, this era that we live in right now, this space era, this moment where we are on the crux of becoming truly a spacefaring species, is a human milestone. The only thing we have in our history that is comparable to what we have done in space, we have to go back to the Polynesians. And this is what I think is really interesting, because we get a lot, when we talk about space exploration, we have a lot of concern about ethics, right? About, oh, you're gonna hear a lot of people say, we don't wanna colonize space the way we colonized Earth. Well, that's not what we're doing. Let's go back and think about what the Polynesians did. So they lived on these islands in the middle of the ocean. Often they could not see another island anywhere around them, and they had no idea. They would look out onto the horizon, and what they would see would be the ocean meet the sky. They would honestly have no idea where they were going, what they were doing. But that didn't stop them. They built their boats. Now, of course, why? Probably strife. They were a patriarchal society. If the older brother got the island, then the younger brother, if he wanted to have, sort of his own space, would have to move. And so they did that. They built boats, and they went across the horizon, and they populated all across the South Pacific. They took with them their culture. And so we see how important it was to bring their home with them. But they also brought with them their agriculture, their knowledge, their traditional knowledge. And they took from island to island how to grow the taro root, how to domesticate the wild islands that they found. And of course, they also built these boats. And I think when we think about human exploration of space, the one thing that really makes me concerned, or not concerned, but competition is really good, and we are in a space race with China. Let's not sort of mince words about that. And competition is good. That's how we got to the moon. However, let's not repeat all the actions that we're doing. So when the Europeans got to Polynesia and they saw these boats, they said, there's no way those boats made it across the ocean. We have nothing to learn from these people. Humans, we have a lot to learn from each other. The beauty, and one of the reasons I always say that the United States made it to the moon first, is because of our diversity, right? All those different innovative brains working together. Certainly they were mostly Western European at that time, but this is what is making America great, is this diversity and this ability to see beyond and understand that everybody has a voice in what we do. So when we think about the Polynesians too, they have a very important story for us as well. They made it all the way to Easter Island. And what happened at Easter Island? They forgot their traditions. They over deforested. They took too many trees down, and they were unable to survive, unable to plant food and so forth. And so that civilization on Easter Island died out. They ended up being, any who survived ended up going to the mainland in South America and being lost. So that is what we lose when we don't preserve our heritage. We lose ourselves. So in the words of John F. Kennedy, we celebrate the past to awaken the future. We think about all of the things that happened in order to do it again. And we do it down here, right? The arts and sciences are admitted amongst all civilized nations as entitled to favor and protection. They are considered not as the peculium of this or that nation, but as the property of humankind at large, and as belonging to the common interests of the whole species. So we have a really interesting parallel here on Earth, right? Back in the 1960s, the same time the United States was trying to reach the moon, Egypt had a very different issue. Egypt wanted to improve its economy. Egypt wanted to harness the Nile River. It couldn't grow, it couldn't develop because it couldn't control the flooding. But they knew if they built a dam, they could. They also knew if they built a dam, they would be flooding the Nubia Valley. The Nubia Valley is considered one of the cradles of human civilization. And in the Nubia Valley, there were a ton of churches, temples, and sites like this. And Egypt didn't just barrel forward ahead. Egypt went to the international community and they said, look, international community, we want to develop. We need to develop. We need to get access to these resources. We need to be able to harness them. But we have this stuff. What should we do? And the international community didn't say, oh, God, Egypt, stop. No, you can't develop. We have to protect and preserve, right? And they didn't say, oh, we don't care, Egypt, that's your problem. It was understood that this was human heritage. It wasn't Egyptian and Nubian. It belongs to all of humanity. And so the international community came together, and the international community raised $80 million, and they moved those temples out of the Nubia Valley piece by piece. And this is really important because when we talk about preservation, a lot of people sort of get concerned. Well, we don't want knee-jerk reactions that we have to protect everything on the moon. That's not what we're doing. We want to manage and safeguard heritage. We want to figure out as an international community what needs to be protected and how to protect it. Out of the Nubia Valley came UNESCO, and the World Heritage Convention. And a lot of people would say to me, well, we've got the World Heritage Convention, so what are we worried about? Let's just apply it to space. Well, one of the precepts of the World Heritage Convention is that you can only nominate a territory that is in your state, within your boundaries, right? And you're gonna find out that Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty says the outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation. You cannot claim territory in space. Therefore, if you were to say, if the United States were to go to the world and say, we would like to protect the Apollo sites as World Heritage sites, people will say, whoa, you're claiming territory in space, that's a violation of the law. Russia would no doubt say we're being imperialist. China will no doubt also react that way. So we cannot use the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, but we can certainly borrow from it. The convention emphasizes the importance for all the peoples of the world of safeguarding unique and irreplaceable property to whatever people it may belong. And so here at For All Moonkind, we say, what is more unanimous, what is more universal than the milestones in human evolution and development and the culmination of the work of humans throughout the world and throughout history to get to the moon. The human relationship to space is necessarily global and universal. We have to accept that and we have to recognize that. And so, because of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, one of these footprints is protected and the other is not. This is an interesting, I put these together and I thought that I was being so clever. And then somebody pointed out that Carl Sagan did it. And so I must have, in some sort of recesses of my mind growing up, have seen it. But of course, this is the footprint in Laetoli, Tanzania, discovered in the 1970s, thought to be one of the first instances where we saw that humanity was able to walk upright. And so that's, the first time we went bipodal, we think. And that is lovingly protected under the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. In fact, it is covered by the Tanzanian sort of brush, right? Because we haven't figured out how to better protect them. And so they discovered them, they measured them, they studied them, and then they covered them back up. And if you want to go see them, you have to have a research proposal, you have to have permission, and so forth. You want to go back to the moon and check out that bootprint? If you have the money, go. There's nothing protecting that. There's nothing that says you can't erase that bootprint. So what about it? What about the law? There are a lot of gaps. This is all of space law. You can fit all of space law, international space law, on one slide, okay? We see there on the larger print are the treaties. Those are the binding treaties. The United States is a party to all of them except the Moon Agreement. And then the Moon Agreement, which was actually negotiated in 1972, but didn't come into force until 1984. All of the other things are resolutions, non-binding resolutions. We have not had a widely ratified treaty on space since 1976 Registration Convention. The United States is party to all of these except the Moon Agreement. The Moon Agreement, I'll talk about it more tonight, but it only has 17 signatories, so it does not carry that much weight. But what we see here is, first of all, I highlight, since 1976, the Outer Space Treaty which is the fundamental document which covers all of human activities in space, was signed in 1967. This is what we thought the universe looked like in 1967, right? This is what I was taught about the solar system, and this is what we know the universe looks like now. So think about the way the views and concepts that framed the negotiations for the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. We didn't have small satellites and satellite constellations. There were maybe 4 or 5 satellites in space at all. And so we had no concept. We knew that there was an incredible promise in space, but we really didn't know what. We had no concept that we might be mining water on the moon. But fundamentally, think about the Outer Space Treaty like the Magna Carta. Like I said, with President Eisenhower's decision not to object to the Soviet overflight, the exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries. There shall be free for exploration and use by all states. Space is the province of all humankind. Space is the province of all humankind. Fundamentally, the fundamental precept of space law, is that it is free for exploration and use by all. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about when people talk about what they're doing in space, space debris. We don't have a lot of rules. Free for exploration and use by all. You can go to space and you can do whatever you want. You can put your picture on the moon. You can shoot down your own satellite and create a bunch of debris. Free for exploration and use by all. There are very few limits on that freedom. Article 2, as I mentioned earlier, says you cannot claim property in space. Now, again, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but the concept of sovereignty in space. So we know a state cannot claim property. How does that affect heritage, right? You can't claim that Apollo lunar landing site should be a national park, because that would be claiming sovereignty. International law applies in space. Space shall be used, no nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction may be put on orbit. Okay, this is really important. This is one of the only prohibitions, outright prohibitions. You will not put weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons anywhere in space. However, space it doesn't say space shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. It says the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. So we have a gap there. And so again, this is thinking about why we want to get the international conversation focused on preservation and protection, because that is one way to fill these gaps. It's something we agree about here on Earth and a foundation for further agreement. We have a concept where astronauts are the envoys of all humankind. We have this concept that we do have liability in space. We do have liability for damage to a space object, and we have a concept of ownership of a space object. So what does that all mean? Okay, anything that you launch into space, that a country launches into space, remains the property of that country, okay? So Charlie Duke's photo, that is United States property, plain and simple. So what does the Outer Space Treaty say about Charlie Duke's photo? Well, it says if you damage it, you owe compensation to the country. All right, what is the compensation if you damage Charlie Duke's photo? What are you going to say? It's obviously it's infinite, but there's no. When we think about liability under the law, what value does it hold? How is it compensable at all? What have you lost? There's no lost profits. There's no loss of investment, right? And then what about the tracks themselves, the bootprint? Well, those aren't objects. And so there's nothing at all that protects them. So Charlie Duke's photo, I can go into court and I can say, hey, you damaged this photo. You were bad, right? And then maybe I can get some sort of damages, maybe. But I can't say anything if somebody goes up and erases the bootprint. Then it's gone, if those tracks are gone. Somebody wants to go and take a plaster cast, somebody wants to grab the dust of the boot print and bring it down and say, this was Neil's boot print. Nothing we can do about that. We do have one more sort of limit on activities in space. Remember, freedom of exploration and use by all. You can do whatever you want. You can't claim property, and so when you think about the Apollo lunar landing sites, any of the potential heritage sites on the moon, isn't that a claim of property just by saying you can't move it? But we have this concept of due regard. You will conduct all of your activities in space with due regard to the corresponding interests of others. And if you are going to potentially cause harmful interference, you have to consult. So it doesn't say don't cause harmful interference. It says, hey, if you think you're going to cause some damage, just give somebody a warning. That's not a really good protection of the heritage sites, right? Hey, I think I'm going to get a little too close to Apollo. And so what about due regard? What does that mean? Due regard. So for you and me, for normal people, it's be considerate, right? Take into consideration what other people are doing. For lawyers, no, not so much. For lawyers, it's a lot of gobbledygook, right? It's a balancing test. You're going to look at the interests of one party and the interests of the other and what the activity was and blah, 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 blah. This is not going to protect any heritage sites. This is just going to cause a lot of billable hours for lawyers like me to argue and argue and appeal and appeal. It's called a totality of the circumstances test. There is no bright line rule. And that's really important, especially when we think about how things can get damaged on the moon. People are talking a lot about people mining water on the moon. Who's going to own the moon? What are we going to do when we get there? How are we going to protect our operational spacecraft when we're on the moon? Well, people are forgetting that our most vulnerable resource on the moon right now is our history, right? Are the artifacts that are there that are not protected. So what we learned from Surveyor 3 is that the regolith is very sharp and there's no gravity to keep it down. And so think about going down a dirt road, right? If you're following a car down a dirt road, you're going to get a lot of dust blown in your face. It's going to be annoying. It's going to hurt your eyes. Well, think about now, take away the gravity, make the dust a lot sharper because there's no erosion on the moon, so the regolith is really sharp. And then add something coming down, any propulsive movement. Apollo 12 landed 100 yards away from Surveyor 3, and yet you can see the pitting that occurred, right? So that's 100 yards away, and it did tremendous damage to Surveyor 3. So what we've seen, and Phil Metzger at the University of Central Florida has done a lot of research on what we call the plume effect, and this lunar ejecta, is that anywhere you land on the moon, when you think about compare the size of the LEM with some of the spacecraft we're thinking of landing on the moon, that's going to cause ejecta to go for miles and miles. We are not going to be able to do any activity on the moon without potentially causing damage to any of the heritage sites on the moon. Now, this is, again, this isn't saying we shouldn't go back to the moon. This is understanding the risk and managing it. What do we need to do? We need to have landing pads on the moon. We need to do what we can to reduce that ejecta. We need to start thinking about this now, not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, because right now it's our history that is at risk. So what is the solution? Well, Eddie Bernice Johnson, I think from this district, right, certainly from Texas, once proposed, hey, let's make all of the Apollo landing sites national parks. Let's put them under the purview of the Department of the Interior. Of course, we know that violates the law. That violates Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. We cannot claim territory in space at all. But few would argue that the sites where the humans first set foot in another celestial body should be recognized and protected less than any site on Earth. So with this in mind, we have been going, For All Moonkind has been going to the international community through the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to say we need to understand what due regard means. And we need to understand what due regard means, especially with respect to heritage protection. And the first step to that is recognizing that we have heritage in outer space. Again, while we talk about actual mining operations and everyone thinks we don't have to worry about things yet, that due regard for objects already on the lunar surface is what we really need to address. That needs to be addressed right away. So this is our roadmap to certainty. I'll walk through each one as we go through. We do have, NASA produced in 2011 voluntary guidelines and recommendations about protecting US sites, okay? These were prepared in 2011, again with Phil Metzger, Beth O'Leary, experts in the field. When asked, how did you come about? So they created, they created what they called safety zones. Please don't get too close to these Apollo sites. Let's create a buffer zone for them. And so you asked Phil Metzger, well, how did you decide what that safety buffer zone should be? He said nothing. They pulled it out of a hat. They just made guesses. We didn't know anything about regolith in 2011, but we knew we needed to protect these sites. These guidelines are purely voluntary. They are not binding, and they were supposed to be updated every 3 years. They have not been updated, and again, they only recognize U.S. heritage. So we passed the One Small Step Act. I worked with Gary Peters and Ted Cruz. The One Small Step Act was intended to make the guidelines binding on any U.S. person that returned to the moon. It was watered down by the commercial industry, saying, well, how about we will agree if we're working with NASA that we will not violate these guidelines. So it's very interesting to me, and I think it really shows sort of the concern and that dichotomy, that sort of tension between development and preservation. Because I don't believe there's any US company that would intentionally destroy one of these sites or intentionally approach one of these sites. And yet they didn't want the language in the bill. So the language in the bill says that if you are contracting with NASA, then you will respect and you will abide by these guidelines. And of course, we know right now most of the commercial entities are contracting with NASA, so our artifacts are safe. But that is truly just one small step in the right direction. We also have the Artemis Accords. These are sort of the legal policy side of the Artemis program. 43 nations have signed the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords do a great job of filling in some of the gaps and inconsistencies in space law. One of the most important things they have is Section 9. Section 9 actually talks about preserving outer space heritage. This is the first multilateral agreement in the history of the world that mentions that we have heritage in outer space. This was signed in 2020 by 8 countries. Again, right now it has 43 signatories. But notice what it says. We intend to preserve. We intend to use our experience. We'll consider. There's not been any movement on this, Section 9. And I'm told, well, we have so many other things to worry about. We've got debris, we've got where we're going to go on the moon, we've got safety zones. This is the most important section of the Artemis Accords, and we're not doing enough to implement them at this time. When we talk about how we're going to preserve, the other thing that the Artemis Accords talk about is Section 11. It takes that concept of safety zones, and it calls them safety zones, but they're really notification and coordination zones. They talk about this concept of due regard that we find in the Outer Space Treaty that's been ratified by more than 100 countries. And it says we will have due regard. And so the Artemis Accords say due regard means we need to have these buffer zones. And so we say, yes, absolutely. And we're not the first country to say so. Russian law talks about safety zones, right? And I think my colleague in China is going to talk a little bit about the Chinese approach to preservation and lunar heritage as well. But when we think about safety zones, they're they're an accepted concept. And so we argue at For All Moonkind that the first safety zones should be around heritage sites, because we can all agree every nation on Earth has signed the World Heritage Convention. We understand that one artifact, it's not an American artifact, it's a human artifact. A Chinese artifact is a human artifact. And so we've been working through the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. There is a working group on legal aspects of space resources activities. We have been active in that working group. This is the way international law works, right? You have a working group to discuss the legal aspects of space resource activities. So we're not even really framing anything out yet. Although we did get the call, we were just given basically a request for comments. They want to produce a framework for space resource activities by next March. And so all of the permanent observers, all of the delegates to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space have been invited to comment on what that framework should look like, what it should include. Of course, we are going to push hard that it should include recognition of heritage. Now, again, baby steps, right? We've even seen in the Artemis Accords, we don't say what is heritage, we just talk about the need to recognize that there's heritage there. We've also seen in the UN, there's a movement on dark and quiet skies, which is this concept that these small satellite constellations in particular are blinding our astronomers. We're not able to see beyond our orbit. We're not able to enjoy the heavens the way our grandparents saw them. And we're starting to see an emphasis on cultural heritage. So the concept that cultural heritage ought to be brought into these discussions is no longer foreign to the UN. And we have this new thing called ATLAC, and it's an action team on lunar activity coordination. And this is a group that's supposed to sort of supplement the working group on legal aspects of space resources, and sort of basically bring everybody to the table to talk about what they're doing on the moon, increasing transparency on the moon. In the first drafts of the ATLAC, it delineated all the things they were going to talk about, and in that first draft, it said lunar heritage, it said heritage protection. Of course, you're trying to meet agreement by consensus with 104 nations, and so we've been boiled down to protect the lunar environment, and I've been told that that means also heritage, and I don't really understand that, and I'm fighting it, but that is where we are at the international level. So what have we got? We have got language in the Artemis Accords that have been agreed to by 43 nations. We have working at the UN level to fighting to get this concept of heritage, the idea that we have heritage protection in space, that we have heritage in space that needs to be safeguarded and protected. And again, I want you to understand why it's so hard. Remember, freedom of exploration and use. If you tell somebody they can't go too close to an Apollo lunar landing site or a Chang'e lunar landing site, or SLIM or intuitive machines, you are violating the Outer Space Treaty, because you are violating that concept of freedom of exploration and use. And so we need to figure out as an international community what it means to show due regard. And really, really importantly, we need to agree what is cultural heritage, what needs to be protected, because it is very easy for any country to say, oh, hey, Luna 2, all those medallions, don't move those. We need a 20-kilometer, radius around it for protection. So we don't want to close off all of the moon to development. We want to come together as an international community. And so we believe that understanding lunar activities, understanding and harnessing this new race for space and to get to the moon, how are we going to prevent conflict on the moon, right? Because everyone's going back to the lunar South Pole where we think the water is. Well, we think we ought to start with what we all agree on, that powerful unifying force of cultural heritage, that concept that we have recognized since Egypt built that Aswan High Dam. Our goal is to create a convention on the preservation and management of human heritage in outer space. We need to have expert testimony from people like Phil Metzger, who is studying the lunar regolith. We need experts from China and Russia to join us in discussing that. And we need to establish temporary heritage zones, heritage protection zones. We don't know. What we really don't want is a rigid rule. This is it forever. You cannot go within a mile of Apollo, period, and stop. No. We want to protect as we learn. We want someday to go back to those sites. We want to know if there's artwork on the leg of the LEM on Apollo 12, right? We want to understand where exactly Buzz Aldrin threw the messages of peace when he took them out of his shoulder pocket. We want to understand all of the science and all of the humanity that was involved with all of these projects. And you think about Chang'e 6, landed on the far side of the moon and brought back samples, right? What else did it do? It drew the character Zheng in the regolith, Zheng, which is the first character of Zhonghua, China. And that's incredible, right? That's so human. Think about graffiti. There's been graffiti as far back as Pompeii. I mean, think of the Lascaux Caves. You don't think storytelling, graffiti is actually just a way of telling stories? That's what humans do. And it's what I think is so amazing. And I'm dying to go back and see, really, do we not think not one of those astronauts carved his initials on the moon? I mean, I don't know how you guys probably know better than me exactly how the cameras were trained the whole time, but that would be pretty tempting, right? So implementing temporary heritage protection zones into the framework of space resource utilization, which is what everybody's talking about now, will not only give us a starting point, but it will help build a legal model from a baseline of conservation and inclusion. Let's protect and conserve because these things are of universal value rather than exploitation and exclusion. Keep out, it's mine, right? Completely changing the tenor of space exploration. This is our generation's Nubia moment. We can come together and we can save the Bootprints, right? It's not gonna cost $80 million. All it requires is a vote to recognize right now that these sites need to be protected and which sites need to be protected. Again, there are more than 115 sites on the moon with evidence of human activity. Not every single site needs to be protected. Harrison Schmitt told me, no, we don't want to protect Apollo 17. We need to recycle those materials. These are the kinds of things we need to think about. But the starting point is easy. It just takes a vote in the United Nations. And we can take that first step now. And so I've been talking to some of you, we've been at this since 2018. We've come a long way. We are really proud of the One Small Step Act. We're really proud of Section 9 of the Artemis Accords. But we've stalled. We're now at that point of lip service. Oh, yes, of course, we're gonna protect heritage. Okay, are you happy now? Go away. No, we need to protect now. We need to really think about this now. And it doesn't need to be big movements. We are proposing a resolution at the United Nations in February that we recognize Apollo 11, Chang'e 4, and Luna 2 as something special to humanity that maybe should deserve some kind of different respect. It's really, really important to understand that part of the reason we're protecting this heritage is recognizing the human achievement. Neil and Buzz didn't get to the moon just on 400,000 Americans who worked on the Apollo program, right? We don't go to the moon unless somebody in Laetoli, Tanzania stands up on 2 feet and frees their hands to carry things, to build tools, right? We don't go to the moon unless we stand up on 2 feet. We don't go to the moon without math. This is a picture of a baboon bone, and it has hash marks on it. And archaeologists have determined that it's not just counting, it's actually adding and subtracting. We don't go to the moon without math. We don't get to the moon without glass. This is, probably in Mesopotamia. Think about that. Somebody in Mesopotamia looked at sand and realized, wow, if you heat this up, I make this really pretty translucent thing. We don't get to the moon without glass. We don't get to the moon without all of human history, without all of the dreamers, the astronomers, all of the people who looked up at the moon and thought about getting there and understanding what was beyond. Preservation is a compelling idea that can help unite people rather than divide them. It's an idea that can help build a sense of community among people throughout the world. And on the moon, we believe that protecting our heritage sites can alleviate the risk of conflict in the operational sites as well. Of course, we've got to end with Bernard of Chartres. We are sitting on the shoulders of giants. The giants throughout our ancestry, every community that has ever existed on Earth has contributed to the moon, to our exploration of space in some way, whether it was just dreaming, whether it was thinking about, Stonehenge, think about all of the cultures using the heavens somehow. We owe it to everyone in our past to protect, as well as everyone in our future. Thank you.